Hello and welcome to the Design Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Chris Whyte, and in this podcast series, we explore the career journeys of design and engineering leaders from the world of physical product development. In today's episode, I'm joined by Michael Bambino, founder of Facility, a consultancy with a brand-driven focus on product design. Michael's journey from engineering to consultancy is one filled with insights, from building a versatile skill set in small firms to starting his own brand-focused business. We dive into what it takes to scale a consultancy without losing quality, how to develop strategic client relationships, and Michael's unique approach to blending creativity with technical expertise. If you're interested in hearing from someone who's transformed technical skills into a creative strategy and built a successful design business, stay tuned. This conversation is for you. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, happy to be here.
No, it's good to have you. Good to have you. So we're going to do a little kind of bit of I'll do a very short summary of your profile, and then we'll crack into it, shall we? So you're the founder and creative director of a design agency called Facility. Got over 15 years in the industry now. I'm not sure how up to date. Obviously, I am gleaming this from all your LinkedIn, Michael. So do step in and correct me if I'm wrong. We go back to your education. So interest in kind of choice of topics here. You studied medicine by the looks of it, and then biomechanical engineering before then going into furniture design, and then mechanical engineering, and then industrial design. We're going to get into that in a little bit. And then your early years, you followed kind of, I'd say, standard internships, but it looks like you did some environmental engineering before then moving into industrial design, worked for a few agencies, worked your way through freelance projects before then. Yeah, just working around. So again, we'll get into that. You've worked for Prime, you've worked for Very, Cabinet Health. You've done some teaching as well. We spoke before the show as well, 15 years of teaching. So, and then it's been best part of 5 years now with Facility, or coming up to 5 years in January.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Yeah, so hopefully it was a very kind of whistle-stop tour of your career. And thank you. Right? Yeah, thank you for listening to the Design Journeys podcast. So why don't we start at the beginning then? So medicine, how did that work out for you?
So the funny thing is, coming out of grad school, I had to experiment a lot with my resume because I think it can be confusing if you just list things. And LinkedIn, I'm guilty of not curating that as tight as I might like speak about my career or my resume, for instance. So, I mean, and stop me if I'm going too far back, but if we drag back to like leaving high school, going to college, now you have to put a marker for like, this is your career. This is what you're going to do. I grew up with a lot of creative stuff and a lot of subculture stuff, like a lot of music. My friends were artists, like all these kinds of things. But I had the burden of being like relatively good in school. And I had the burden of having parents who were definitely like cracking the whip and applying pressure. So I think when it came time to school, I was like, music school, right? And they were like, hell no. Really, it's just like I excelled in math and science. And they just slid a book across the table that had like an encyclopedia definition of engineering. And on paper, it sounds like, for someone who likes to build stuff, someone who sees themselves as being like somewhat technical or whatever it might be, I was like, this sounds great. And what they were doing is they were luring me to go to Cooper Union because it was free in New York City. Yeah. So that's where I went for undergrad. I did mechanical engineering. The short story there is incredible school, incredible culture. It's not like a college. The campus is New York. The school is like really selective, incredibly hardcore, filled with all these eccentric kind of funny students. So it's just three schools: engineering, architecture, and art. So these like seemingly unrelated disciplines are all smashed into one place. But I knew I didn't like engineering like 6 weeks in. I was like, no, not this. But to be honest, I think I listened to a bit of a previous podcast, and forgive me, I can't remember the guest, but they also said like, oh, I was most of the way through the degree, so I just put my head down and finished. And that's very like indicative of a schooly person, like, you know, someone who's just like, I don't want to get off the rails. I've already invested. There's like an efficiency at play that is kind of very engineering. And that's what I did. Like one semester in, I was like, not this. And I basically just finished the degree begrudgingly. But leaving school, I knew there had to be something else. And I gave it a couple shots, to be honest. The first time was biomedical engineering, because in my head, it was like, I got to kind of soften these technical engineering skills. It seemed like a toolkit, but where to apply it? Because to be honest, like heavy physics, calculus, you feel like you have the tools to kind of decode anything, but I've needed a human element, kind of needed something softer. And in my head, I really loved biology, or so I thought. Started a PhD program that lasted about a year. Moved to New Orleans immediately after Hurricane Katrina. So that was a factor.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, a lot going on.
Yeah.
I'm sure you didn't plan for this. But to shorten up the story a little bit, because I know that's not the whole podcast, left New Orleans, like that didn't work out. Came back to New York, which is where I'm from. Haven't been able to get terribly far away, and just started working. And to be honest, it's something I recommend for a lot of our students, just in general, like earn your own money, understand your worth, understand how you like to invest your time, understand what it's like to work with other people. Like there's just so much to it once you get out of school, and then helps you kind of align your priorities. So I was doing that and then experimenting in the background. And I got, to be honest, really lucky. I just started taking design classes at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn.
Okay, cool.
It just like hit immediately. And I got lucky in the sense that I took kind of a not so hot class at Cooper Union that was like a product design intro kind of situation. And that's how I knew what it was. And on a whim, went to Pratt, took some classes, absolutely loved it. I was like, this unlocks it. This is it. And it was just heads down from there. Like got into Pratt, thank goodness. That was where I wanted to be, what I wanted to do. And leaving Pratt with an industrial design degree, that's when I kind of hit that, post-grad, trying a little bit of everything. Whoever will hire me and call me a designer, kind of part of my career.
How did you land that first role then as a designer?
I mean, kind of related to what I was saying earlier with like experimenting with the resume. And I mostly teach undergrad, but I have some grad students and I have some people from like Cooper Union, for instance, where I taught who want to move into design, or people with technical backgrounds. And they're kind of like, what job titles should I look for? How should I present myself? And to be honest, and maybe it's kind of a failure of the industry to some degree, but coming out and saying like, oh, I've got, people call like the two sides of the brain, or like the technical and the creative. And most people didn't really know what to do with that. They had roles of design and they had roles of engineering, and they didn't really see I'm sure they saw the benefit of it, but they couldn't really like effectively slot me in as this like creative technical person, or like, like designer with an engineering prowess. And it got to the point where I truly wanted to be titled as a designer. I kind of like, my skin kind of like crawled a little bit when people brought up the engineering, and I, to some degree, kind of left it behind and let the work kind of speak for itself. Like there was a lot of grad projects that had like a very technical execution, although it wasn't like in the forefront. It wasn't like I was building robots. It was just stuff that was like created a magic that, you needed some kind of technical expertise to have pulled off. And to be honest, in a lot of cases, I tapped engineers that I knew to help me do it. Like I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
But anyway,
well, I think
sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, there's something to be said for a great industrial designer or product designer who has also got the engineering underpinnings. And even if you're not going to either want to, or you're not no longer able to do all the calculations and the DFM, but at least you're using the fact that that exists, and that you've probably got someone who can deliver that, so that you probably get to a realistic design that can still be beautiful quicker than someone who hasn't got any exposure to that side of things and is just creating lots of nice concepts for someone else to pull apart and destroy their dreams.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting how it works. Like there's a very simple way in which the two pieces come together. Exactly like you said, like you could kind of, I found when I went to design school, like I took to CAD particularly well, because I think it's a not user-friendly program. Like it can be like to open up SolidWorks, and if say you got a degree in like fine arts and you open up this like dimension-driven program that seems kind of technical, like, okay, I hit that stuff in more of a stride, because I'm like, I've done numbers. And then, when we're getting into, at Pratt, it was very like an art driven program, very like, we're going to study form, we're going to study color, and the technical stuff I could kind of slot in a little more intuitively because of the undergrad stuff. So yeah, in very simple ways, like that's true. But I find that it's like hard to put into words. It's not necessarily like a toggling of mindsets or expertise, but it's, I think I get lucky in that I managed to kind of swirl them together in some kind of way where I could seamlessly apply them. And it doesn't feel like I'm doing one or the other. It just feels like we're looking ahead. we're thinking about like the real objectives, but we're also thinking about the artistry and like the ambition of the field of design. And, I continue to experiment and talk about it. I'm not sure I cracked it. I'm not sure any of that made sense, but it's, for me, it's just been like a journey, to figure it all out.
It's interesting because it's something that I come across daily when I'm speaking to candidates and clients. And I think it's more prevalent in the UK in the design scene where you will have a lot of people, especially in smaller businesses or smaller design teams, who can cover both the industrial design and some of the design engineering. So you get a bit of a scope there. But my experience in the States is it is a lot more kind of diametric. You're either an industrial designer or you're a mechanical engineer. There's very few people that kind of operate in that center space. I always ask my clients if I'm hiring for that type of role is, if you imagine a scale of 1 to 10. I can't remember who it was that gave me this advice years ago, but I've been doing it for years. Imagine a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being a pure front-end industrial designer and 10 being your pure quintessential mechanical engineer. Where on this scale does this role sit? And it can be a range. So sometimes they're dipping into a 2 or a 3, and sometimes they're a 6, or it could be actually we want someone who's more between a 4 and an 8, so that they might do some sketching, but really we want them to focus on the engineering side. I don't know whether that's something that is that common in the States.
No, it's a great way to frame it. It's kind of, I have like many feelings about that. First, it's like, it is a very simple and very kind of like executable way to frame it, because truthfully, that's mostly what people are looking for. They're kind of like, well, we need a designer, but to be frank, this is going to be like a CAD and execution level job. We don't want someone who's just going to be a couple layers up from that in a concept space, or someone who doesn't know how things get made. So we want you to be more on the technical side, or vice versa. But what I found, some of my disappointment, like getting spat out into industry, is the kind of like seemingly like binary nature. It's kind of like, well, surely if you're technical, you're lacking in the creative stuff, or vice versa. But it's the other thing you brought up. So I'm like trying to remember what I had a point. But the other thing you brought up that was really interesting, and we could and for a moment I could skip all the way ahead to like, a bit of advice. Like if you're a young designer, I got lucky in that I found a place in small firms, specifically small consulting firms. And those are exactly what you said. Like, you're going to get these blended roles. You might clean the shop when things are quiet, but you might also like be executing drawings that are going direct to the factory and having those conversations. But you also have to be doing like crude models, concept sketching. You're going to pitch to the clients. Like, you're doing all manner of stuff that at a bigger firm you're not supposed to be doing, or they've delineated roles so fine that, there's a designer, but they don't touch CAD. They're like upstream of CAD, which I always, I feel like I got lucky in that. I got like a really holistic thing, but they also appreciated that I was coming to it with like a variety of perspectives and skill sets, and I could kind of move up and down the stream because it just demanded that it be so. And that just made me very kind of confident in what I could do, but also let me know that like that's probably where I'm going to be, at least before you get to like the senior and the manager and the director role. If you're kind of still in like the totem pole of like execution, design execution, having being in a smaller firm where you could do more, be exposed to more, I liked it a lot.
It's if you're looking at ways to stand out as well as an applicant. Imagine you've had kind of the same amount of experience as someone competing for the same role, but they've spent maybe all of that time working within a structured environment and pigeonholed into one role, versus if you've spent same amount of time in a small agile consultancy where you've had to wear many hats. Yes, you're going to have to learn how to adjust and follow their regime, but you're going to bring so much more to the party that other person wouldn't have had any exposure to. It's there's a lot to be said for that kind of small. I think everyone should experience it at some point, ideally in their career, because it's hard. I think it's harder to go from a very structured kind of existence to then the chaos of a small firm if you've not experienced it before. Whereas the other way around actually might be quite a relief to walk away from the chaos sometimes. But yeah, that's interesting. So tell me about some of the moves along the way then. So some of the highlights of your career, kind of, because you've worked at some really interesting consultancies, haven't you?
Yeah, it was kind of in a way somewhat typical, and what I tell, forgive all like the Lower East Side, New York City sirens, and
it's authentic. It's
we're hard at work here. I mean, it was kind of typical in a way, and something I speak to students all the time. I'm like, you're going to start your career, and likely ought to start your career just pinballing around. Like you're going to think. I left school thinking like exhibition design is so academic, intellectual. I did a lot of kind of like installation stuff, like exhibit design stuff in grad school. And then I was interning at a firm doing exhibition design, and they were doing more like museum level architectural long projects, like 5-year projects and these kinds of things. And thought that was it. And granted, I had one, went to one place, got one version of it, and thought, it's not really resonating. Had all the feelings you feel where you're just like, I'm not sure I'm good at this. The conversations are not all making sense to me. I just don't feel I'm running in the same direction. I'll try something else. Then I did a bit of furniture design. So I always struggle with this as a teacher, having gone to design school and then having been outside of design for many years beforehand. These kind of like almost like indoctrinations of designers about like furniture. Everybody's like infatuated with furniture. And I like, just like everyone else, kind of got the bug, and I made some stuff and really loved it. Thought, I'm going to do this. And then worked for a furniture designer, tried to like get some of my own stuff off the ground. Again, kind of as I understood it more, as I tried it more, I'm like, this doesn't seem like I'm giving it all of what I could be doing. Again, like the conversations don't seem natural. It seems like a slight mismatch. Like I didn't do terrible at any of these jobs. It was just like not quite getting the buzz that I got working on that project or in this class or whatever it might be. And, I think the last big one before, and I did all kinds of stuff. I did like architectural hardware, like high-end door pulls and doorknobs for like rich people's mansions and these kinds of things. And then the big one before I fell into consulting, and to be clear, like there was a clear point where I was like, it's got to be consulting, but those jobs are so few and far in between, hard to get. Just like furniture, everyone's like, I want to be in so many of my students, I feel so bad. They're like, I want to move into consulting. And I'm just like, it's going to be hard, but just keep at it. You'll get there eventually if you keep going. And I was kind of working on that in the background, like chatting with people, visiting studios, but I kind of grew a little exhausted with freelancing, the insecurity of it, all that stuff, and landed a job at Toomey. And the interesting thing at Toomey was they were trying, to their credit, they were trying to take my like mixed background and create a new role, which was essentially they had this guy he was like the luggage guru, and he had been there forever, knew the products inside and out, knew the factory inside and out, was just like the go-to guy, had patents just like falling out of conversations as he was going. And the idea was that I would kind of work under this gentleman, and then he would essentially like retire and I would take on this role. So it was definitely design, but whereas the technical designers in the company were literally, making tech packs for bags, I was like doing some of that, but also going to the factory, also experimenting with like form for luggage, trying to like improve their process, looking at like wheel construction and seeing if we can't like remove some weight, like all these kinds of things. So it's one of those things, like I learned a lot. It's like when they're creating a role for you, that sounds really good, but that also means there's like no roadmap, no precedent. Everyone's kind of flying by the seat of their pants. So if you're comfortable shaping that role, like maybe it works out great. I felt like I struggled a little bit. Again, like internally, I was being pushed around a little bit. Never quite felt like 100%. It also was a very corporate design environment. I feel like some people, and that's why I tell people like, just try a little bit of everything. Because for me, I was just like, oh, this isn't, at least this version of it doesn't quite resonate with me. There wasn't anything it wasn't particularly like process driven. It wasn't scrappy. It wasn't, I don't want to like bash to me. They took really good care of me, but it just wasn't right for me. I think I wanted it to be a little more like school, a little more scrappy, a little more like traditional ID. But like I said, like very secure, flew us around business class to do all these kinds of things. And honestly, that was incredible. Learned a lot about like the execution of the design because they're a brand that produces things on a seasonal calendar. So there was a lot of benefits to it. And obviously there's like literal benefits like pay and all these things. But in the throes of that, I got a consultancy called Ion Design that I had been in talks with. I had freelanced with in the past, came back around and said, we have an opening. Like, would you like it? It was like that simple. I thought about it for like 24 hours. It was a pay cut. I inherited like a 90-minute commute. And I was like, yes.
Of course.
It was just it was a great place to work. It was like a wonderful place. They had a full shop. Like I said, the conversations you were just like, this feels right. Everything makes sense. I feel like I'm doing 100% of what I can do here. And it was, it's always a tricky decision, but I kind of pulled the plug on the Toomey thing and jumped into consulting and kind of have been heads down in consulting to some degree ever since.
Awesome. Yeah, it's often the way, and it's often a barrier for a lot of more experienced people making that plunge or taking that turn into consulting, because typically they don't often, unless it's one of the big kind of worldwide consultancies, they don't pay as well as the equivalent in-house position. But
yeah, absolutely.
If you want the lifestyle, if you want the variety and like the scrappiness and all that kind of stuff, then that's a decision that you have to make a lot of times. But it's
and
easy
also,
to do that.
You have to be honest about like, I was kind of lucky in that I was younger. I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. It's New York, and the job was a big commute, but it was like public transit got me all the way there.
Yeah,
you could make it work. For plenty of people, taking like a big pay cut when you're just starting to like build a career. If you got stuff going on, I could see how that wouldn't work out. But I was just, I had invested as part of the reason why I stayed in New York. I was just kind of like, I need to like shift into this career. I need to get a role that says designer with a capital D. And I was like, okay, I'm going to take on this commute. I just need to like continue to scrape forward and get there. And that was like my priority. But yeah, I mean, for a lot of people, it might not work out. It might not resonate with you, that kind of environment. You might not want to clean the shop, which a lot of people are kind of like, I have to do what? I had to shoo a bird out of our conference room once a couple of years ago at Prime Studio. And I was like, I signed up for this.
Yeah, it's you have to do all sorts at small companies. You're the kind of consultant, designer, tea or coffee maker, the cleaner, the plumber. I was in my last company. Because I was the least afraid of computers, so I was the IT nerd. And
oh no, yeah,
I'd always be the first port of call. And I was a director there as well. So it's nothing's beneath you really in a small company. You just got to roll your sleeves up and crack on.
Yeah, but it's like not that this is what's coming next in the conversation, but it's a great. I mean, it depends on what your goals are, but at some point, watching the owners and being so close to the owners of these small firms, seeing what they're doing, seeing what the lifestyle's like, the projects, I was like, I want to do this one day. And not only do you get the inspiration to do it, but you learn all the tools. So early on, it was kind of like, I'm going to watch and learn. I'm seeing all the pieces of the puzzle in action, and it will help me do this in the future. And then later at Prime Studio, I was just very open, like, I want to be doing this one day. And Stuart, the owner, very generously was kind of like, I could let you in on like how I do proposals for projects and how I budget the designers at their pay rates and like these kinds of things. And so yeah, you get led in on that process and it just helps you. Whereas if you're at a bigger firm, I mean, there's all the hierarchy and there's all the removal of different roles.
Yeah.
And, you get less of that. So it's another benefit at a small place.
Absolutely. Well, let's fast forward to today then. So you've been running a facility since January 2020. Is that right? How long before that was facility kind of existing in your head? How long was the lead time up to that?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I mean, I always say that it happened organically. So it was, I mean, probably probably since I was in grad school, I knew,
Mm.
we had visited Smart Design when I was at Cooper Union, so I was an
Okay.
undergrad, and I got a little glimpse of it. There was also some like Cooper graduates who were doing interesting things. Like there's this group called Cry Precision that was doing, I mean, a lot of like military stuff, which is kind of like another
Mm.
conversation, but they were just like left school, started a lab in the
Mm.
Navy Yard when the Navy Yard wasn't quite a thing. The Navy Yard just being like this big industrial area of Brooklyn that was a
Okay.
naval port, and they turned into, it's basically this huge design center now. So they
Mm.
were like almost like first in there doing all kinds of interesting, wild stuff. And they came back and gave these talks. And I was like, yeah, I want to do my own thing.
Are you frustrated by drawn-out recruitment processes, missing out on talent to your competition, or wasting time interviewing candidates who don't quite live up to their profile? If you're the founder or leader of a physical technology brand or design consultancy, here's what we can do for you. By working closely with you and your team, Codu will help you improve your entire existence of hiring. We'll make it easier to identify, attract, and ultimately hire the very best design and engineering talent ahead of or from your competition. You'll only interview candidates who fit the brief, and we'll work with you to ensure you get the outcome you want in a timely manner, which is typically within 6 weeks or less. We have a 100% fill rate, and we guarantee to get you a positive outcome. If we don't deliver, you don't pay. But how can I make such a claim? Well, the short answer is I've been doing this for a very long time now. Our process at Codu is built from over a decade of my own personal experience recruiting within physical product design and development. I've hired hundreds of designers, engineers, managers and leaders in that time, over 97% of whom are still in post after 12 months. On top of that, I've personally built an incredible network of thousands of professionals in the physical product design and engineering space, covering the UK, US and Europe. And I've taken what I've learned over the years and put the best of that into Codu. So if you'd like to spend less time stuck in a recruitment loop and more time doing what you love, get in touch. Email chris@teamcodu.com or message me on LinkedIn. But for now, let's get back to the show.
And it started to take more and more shape, like, oh, it's a consultancy. Once I get to design school, I'm like, oh, I visited a couple of consultancies. These people make sense to me. I want to do that. Feels kind of like school, variety of projects.
Yeah.
You're doing a variety of roles. But it's a bit of my personality, but I was still like learning, harvesting, getting up the courage and all this. And to be totally honest, January, it started to take shape very organically. It wasn't like I left a role and I'm like, we're starting a company called Facility today. This is the 5-year plan. It was kind of like, just like most things in life, it picked up speed. I felt like I was a certain level of seniority and experience that I wasn't force fitting it. It was just starting to happen. And I had been in New York long enough that, kind of referrals and connections and these things just started to accumulate into like, not only is this full-time work, but this is pushing out of the bounds of say like contractor or freelancer, and it's taking the shape of like, a company or consultancy as I know it. And then once I realized that, once I came to peace with like, this is what you're doing. And what does your life look like if this is what it is?
Yeah.
I started to put all the critical pieces in place like as soon as possible. I was like, okay, we need a contract lawyer. We need accountants. Eventually we need to consider, I worked under my own name for a while, but for me personally, it was kind of making it clear that it's not just me. I'm not a designer doing kind of like name brand design, my own design stuff. I'm like a designer for hire that can solve problems and, creating stylish products that are removed from my own sensibility. So it's not my name on the door. So it was kind of like, okay, let's work on what that entity is, what that stands for, what it means, and all the messaging surrounding that, like the marketing and stuff. So that's more recent, like it being Facility, marketing that, defining what that is still, continues to be something we're building, but that itself is probably like 18 months old, Facility, because before that it was Michael Bambino Design, which made for a very long domain name.
You've always got that when you've got it as your own name as well. It's like, well, is it a consultancy or is Michael Bambino a freelancer? And whilst
100%,
there's not a lot of difference in terms of the actual kind of day-to-day work that you're doing, the perception from the clients and ultimately the amount you can charge for the value that you offer then can be wildly different, and the way that they engage with you as well. And that's something that I speak to a lot of kind of small agency owners about, and it's something that most people go through that. They start off kind of a consultancy through circumstance. They're maybe laid off and they get offered some freelance work, and then that kind of, how can I turn this into a proper business as opposed to a freelancer gig? So where does the name Facility come from then? What's the story behind that?
I mean, there should be a better story, but we just did like a big naming exercise, and I have to admit, like there's, you're always, you take your name out of it, but I'm always trying to reconcile like Facility with me and my values and my personality. Michael Bambino design versus Facility, but there's kind of it's definitely a strong name. It definitely has like an edge to it. All our branding it's just huge on everything.
Okay.
So there's kind of like a firm hand to it, and it's like it has an edge to it, but it just still feels like solid, competent, neutral. But I have to be honest, like getting deeper in my career and working more on brand driven products, and working very closely now with as Facility alongside brand quite often, if not in every single project. My appreciation and kind of understanding of the workings of brand and like more the feeling that comes across rather than the meaning. It's kind of like the meaning is like a rationalization step after the brands hit you, after the feelings hit you, these kinds of things. And that was the one that felt right. And there's all kinds of boring background, like legal stuff about clearing names and, who might sue us and these kinds of things. So, that's like the nitty gritty. But yeah, we went through a pretty exhaustive exercise, and I'm sure everyone can appreciate, like, especially people in product development. I mean, a big part of it is about curating a marketable portfolio. And if you're doing consulting projects and 25% of those go to market, and 25% of those are projects that you actually want to promote, talk about, and say this embodies Facility, you need several years just to get a portfolio that you could speak to. So we're doing that in the background. In parallel, we're kind of like constantly talking about Facility, the brand, shaping the pieces, making sure it feels right. And then, finally we launched the whole thing, and the reception's been really great. I love it. Hopefully people like it and makes sense to them. I did get a lot from the existing clients that are like, it's still you though, right? I'm like, yeah, but it's bigger, it's better.
Well, that's great though that they're asking that question, and actually it's a common complaint of some of the bigger agencies in that it's not still you. If you're working for a PA consulting, let's say, or maybe a smart design, it's like, are you sure you're getting kind of the person that pitched? Yeah, because it's not always the case. It's a common complaint with not necessarily those two.
And to be honest, I mean, like, not to, sorry to cut you off, but not to, I mean, I've worked at places where, you just see the shuffling of resources and designers, and you think like, well, we're always going to do the best work we can do. But inevitably, because of bandwidth, timing, budgeting, whatever, somebody's project is the intern's project. Yeah. And that happens, and we'll do that. Like, as we grow, like there'll be people who come in and be like, oh, inevitably this will be the intern's project. And then we'll have a senior person kind of like looking over their shoulder. But I mean, the good thing for me right now is I have my hands all over everything. And then it's just a matter of, very purposely made myself the creative director. And that's not an arbitrary thing. It's like, just like with teaching, I'm kind of setting things in motion, but I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm not. And I'm not precious about, kind of pulling in the right people to do the best possible job. And I'm kind of the guiding hand. So it's always going to be, I'm always there, at least for now. If we blow up and we just multiply design units over and over again, and I'm out in the Hamptons enjoying myself and just, setting it in motion, we could talk about that then. But, at the moment, still creative direction coming from me.
Yeah. Well, that's it, isn't it? You've got the plus side of being a small, agile consultancy is that you get what you see, and you've still got, as as the creative director and the founder, you've still got kind of a say in those projects, and you're leading those. As the pain point as you scale is, how do you do that without sacrificing the quality and annoying your clients? Because there's nothing worse than engaging with an agency or a consultancy, and they do a great job on the first project, but the longer you work with them, the lower the output is, because you know that principal consultant's moved on to something else, and it's the interns or it's the juniors that are actually delivering like further down the line. So how do you, and I don't know if you've got an answer for this, but how do you scale a small business then, but retain the value that you're offering? Or do you just accept that, we're a big agency now, this is what you get? Kind of, you've got the resource versus the individual kind of interest or kind of control, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's such a good question, and it's not only relationship of scaling, but also like business strategy. And this is a terrible analogy, but we were in the office, we were talking about, like, should we get somebody to clean this office? Yeah, but we kept hiring and letting go cleaners because the first time they come around, the place will be spotless. And then after a while, you're like, I'm not sure that they're cleaning anymore. Like they get on a bit of a cleaning retainer, and you're just like, everything's still dusty when we come back. You're like, my old boss used to leave little tests. Like he would like move things in a certain way, put like a dirty thing in a place, and he comes back and it's the same. And he's like, I gotta let this cleaner go. That all not a great comparison. But yeah, so there's always that too. Like you continue to work with someone and you're like, well, this client's kind of locked up. They know what they're going to get. We don't have to like wow them on this third project. So, I mean, to be totally transparent, like that is something I'm excited to figure out. I mean, it's still early days, like 5 years, growing, but, just the nature of the industry and like how everything's going, I haven't exploded. We're not like getting a larger office space and dealing with that problem yet. I mean, I think I've known many designers and even like design, like consultancy owners and these kinds of roles where you could tell that they struggle to step back and to take their fingerprints off of stuff. Maybe because I didn't grow up specifically with ID, or I didn't do an undergrad in ID. And I think it has a strong relationship to teaching. Like my whole role is teaching is like guidance, setting people on a path. A week later, they come in with something and we reflect on that. And I kind of treat the consultancy that way as well, to a degree. I feel like you can maintain that a lot longer than somebody who needs to pencil sketch. The owner needs to pencil sketch on like each project and have their idea in the mix. You also be honest about your age and your perspective. Design, people are starting to talk about it a lot more, but it's not, ID is not an industry where there's like enough perspective. So having like, the white dudes sketches in the mix every project is not as critical as having like the diverse like design team.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then I guess, if I were to forecast and kind of like pull it out of my backside because I'm not doing it yet, but in the future, you'd imagine hiring design leadership that's trusted and kind of let them do their thing. And just kind of, you continue to go up the stream and you're just looking at more gestural things. Like, how did that project end up? Okay, there was a couple steps along the way and the client pulled me aside. Like, we just got to make sure that, you're just kind of, maintaining and doing more and more of like strategic work and less of like executional design work, which I'm, for whatever reason, I'm kind of cool with.
I think if the last couple of years have taught me anything, for sure, it's just to be very, very wary of letting complacency kind of sink in.
Yeah.
In terms of, just because you're getting loads of work out of a particular client and you've worked with them for years, anything could happen externally, whether it be the economy, whether it be kind of a pandemic, or whether it just be kind of other factors in there, that because you've got comfortable, if not complacent, that you haven't been so hot on probing or hot on communicating with that business and the stakeholders. So then you're caught off guard when the next project goes to a rival, or they end up doing it internally because they're, for whatever reason, they've decided they're not satisfied with the outcome, and you've never asked because you assumed that it was kind of everything was fine.
Yeah.
most people listening to this can probably resonate with that over the last couple of years of how kind of up and down the market's been, especially the COVID bounce back and then kind of it's resetting in the last 2 years. But interesting.
Yeah,
Well,
and I have to say, like, oh, sorry. I mean, maybe the last little bit is the and this is a personal thing, so it's always a little awkward, like describing the firm within your own perspective or personality. But because of the scale of it, and because I am like the business owner and design leadership, I'm very energized with this work for a lot of reasons. First of all, I feel like lucky and privileged to have cracked into it. Like I remember before school just being like, if I'm just one day have one card that says designer, I'm going to be so happy. And then you get there and you continue to move the bar. So I'm still very excited to be doing this. Yeah. And it's been a while. I didn't just graduate, like still very like pretty lucky. This is fun. Yeah. And it's academic. I have the teaching thing is constantly peppering like a philosophical, academic, ideological part into it. But I think there's also a bit of an outsider's mentality that I try to bring to the work where we kind of pummel every project with a lot of strategy. And it's, maybe we're giving it away for free, but it just seems like you ought not to be doing this work if not constantly pushing on strategy. And I find that we learn a lot. Everyone gets very energized with very big kind of like culture-based conversations, but also clients don't always expect that, don't always ask for it. And there, every now and again, there could be like, moments of discomfort, but it stretches everyone and produces outcomes that you couldn't have predicted, outcomes that kind of push the boundaries a little bit or are more ambitious. And, why do the work if not to kind of do a bit of that? And, everyone leaves having learned a little something. It's just like a certain energy because, not doom and gloom, but they talk about like, I'm like so excited when AI just does the CAD for us. But after a while, you're like minimal Eurocentric design, please. And that just like, it churns it out. And you're like, so what is my value here? So yeah, constantly just like being, bringing humanity into the process as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So what is it that, with respect to facility then, what would you say you guys really shine at? What makes you different to a certain extent to the other kind of consultancies of a similar size?
Well, I think in a very simple way and a kind of like a services way, I would say like we're very focused on the things that we're great at. And we try to separate out functions so that you go to the right place for those. So there'll be plenty of people, and it happens all the time. They'll come in, they'll be like, you can do the brand and the graphics, right? And we're like, we could, but you don't want us to do that. Similarly, they'll be like, you'll do the sourcing and like head up the production and operations and stuff, right? It's like there'll be a phase of work inevitably where we're like doing hand holding and helping you do that. But no, like our core capability and our strengths go from, early strategy, kind of strategic stuff, like where are we headed and why, all the way to like we fully defined not only a physical product and supplementary pieces, like we do a lot of packaging, but a roadmap for the future. And I think that's maybe the unique part, to lay on top of all the services. There's literally like upfront portions called strategy, and hit or miss whether people are like, I don't want to pay for that. But everything along the way is always kind of like you talked about with the engineering mind, like toggling to the end and just saying like, can we make this? It's kind of, when you come up from that and you think strategically, it's like, as we're working, it's like, what does this look like for your company in 5, 10, 15 years? Like this is product 1, but we could foresee product 6, and this is what it might look like. So there's definitely kind of a baked in philosophy and strategic perspective that feels like it just informs everything and makes not only the end product more robust, but we kind of give you the keys. We like shape the car and then give you the keys. So you we'd love for you to come back for products 2, 3, 4, and 5, but we've given you the roadmap, the strong kind of like guiding hand that you could set off, and where you're headed, and to a degree how to get there. And I think in terms of the actual products we do, I think it's a natural result of my career trajectory, but also I just doing any consumer products that don't have a strong brand perspective in place, is always very tricky. So I always say that we do kind of like brand driven consumer product. And it's not as though the branding and the marketing is something that we're incredibly passionate about. It just seems like what that indicates is a strong perspective, like a point of differentiation, a business plan, like all the basics of like where you're headed, such that we know the kind of product to shape to support that larger like ecosystem of thought, but also like the success for everyone involved is, success rate will be a lot higher because you have a mechanism to get that to the world. So in terms of like the actual products we do, I mean, it's all over the map, but it is like brand driven consumer products. I think I made a list because I'm so bad at like categories of products. It's on here somewhere, but it's like all over the map, like tech accessories, like healthcare products, kitchen products. And there's a bunch of things like personally I would love for us to do. And it's just a question of like, how do you get there? Every time I have a chat like this with somebody, I'm like, I really want to solve. Whenever you talk about like consumer product, brand driven product, it brings up certain ideas. And I like to think that we're creating innovative products, but in terms of solving tangible problems that people really need solved, like we have a couple products where we're designing for disability. There's just not enough of those projects, not enough funding for those projects. So when one comes along, we're like very eager to work with your budget, very eager to kind of like come up with something special and continue to shine a light so that we, continue to get projects like that. And those are very challenging projects, but as much as kind of like a DTC, very cool cosmetics line is, and as great of a project as it is as a firm, you'd love to pair that with kind of like a social good, feel good.
Yeah.
We cracked the problem and helped people.
Yeah, that's again going back to the small agile businesses. You've got the choice to do that. The larger agencies are invariably going to price themselves out of that type of work, and even if they were to take it, are they getting the value that they want out of that or that they need to get them to the next line? Whereas you can say, look, I can take on this project. I know that I'm not going to make a lot of money on it, but it's more than that. It's value, and then that's only going to. My experience of adding as much value as you can throughout your career is that it all pays off in the end. It all kind of comes around. So that business probably needs someone like you to get them to where they want to be, to help however many other people, and that's worth so much more than an extra zero on the invoice, I think. So
I mean, with this project specifically, and this is where us being like malleable, flexible, and always being strategic is, the first conversation is always like, people sometimes they come in hot and they're just like, this is what I want to do. And maybe they don't understand product development that well. So it can be a little bit of a sticker shock. You just kind of lay out like what it's going to take. And you're like, okay, so there's our fee times 2 for like a development firm to like source factories. And, and then there's like, and you're like, let's take a step back. Like what are you trying to do? Why are you doing it? What are the timelines like? And then all of a sudden we're designing products for a pitch for funding. And kind of like a somewhat typical move in consulting, especially with all like the VC funding, all over the place. But suddenly you're kind of like partnering with them and trying to help them get there. And ideally they get the funding, they come straight back and we design the products. But, rather than just taking their money and doing what they say they want to do, we're kind of like, hey, we've done this a lot. Here's the obstacles ahead. Here's how you might navigate it. Let's even just do like a free strategic kind of like workshop where we work through like the pathways. We look at relative pricing and timelines, and you can decide what's best for you. And then happy to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's again, that's speaking to the value, isn't it? And doing the right thing. So we're rapidly running out of time, Michael. I'm very sorry. It's I've really enjoyed our conversation, but I like to wrap things up with kind of book and podcast recommendations. So what are you recommending at the moment with respect to books?
So I think the reason I was talking about energy, and part of the reason why I love what I do and love this world of stuff is if you can get to a profession where it feels like that it's woven into your personality and you're kind of working on it all the time and you feel really like invigorated, energized, it doesn't feel like work. I mean, obviously it's a lot of work and it does feel like work, but constantly just turning over, like, what does it mean to be creative? Like, am I getting everything I need from these projects? What could you supplement with? Who are you as a person? Like all these big questions. And I was gifted the book, I think it's called The Creative Act by Rick Rubin.
Okay.
It's amazing. I'm like pawning this book off to everyone that will listen. It's just like the right book for me at the right time. And it's he's a very kind of, in terms of the way he speaks and the way he relates to, creative acts, he can be like a very Zen kind of hippy dippy character. And it is like a very zoomed out. So obviously he's like a famous record producer and he's touched like so many genres, so many like hit records. And he's this like producer guru character, but he writes this book that is kind of like an open-ended kind of a guide, but it's very soft-handed about all creative acts. And it's just super short chapters because I'm real like reading sometimes is like making time for it, getting the attention and getting a run at it. I mean, the chapters are like a couple pages.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of like, it's things that everybody need to hear, especially coming out of engineering, about how all human beings are creative, about how your creative process, your practice, your investigation is for you and for you alone, and you should start there. So it's very like inspiring, gives you great perspective. It gives you some like actual tools to like practice.
Oh, cool.
And just like most creative professionals, I'm kind of always trying to float things in the background, like for my own satisfaction. And that's where I've gotten. I'm like, if I make some stuff in the basement and never show it to anyone, that's okay. Like this is a practice to create like a full expressive creative person. And I can bring the sentiment back into a facility, maybe not the thing from the basement. So that book, The Creative Act,
some version of it.
If I've gotten
The
the
Creative
title.
Act. Well, I'll look that up.
Incredible.
Yeah, I'll look that up. My listening list on Audible is growing every time I do one of these interviews. So I'll definitely check that out. And as a fan of music as well, I'm sure.
Yeah,
I'll find that interesting.
And do I have time for one other one? Because then there's one very pragmatic.
Yeah, go quickly. I do have to jump onto another call, but yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I don't usually read so many like design specific books or like, this is going to make me sound like I need to like widen my berth a little bit. But I'm reading a book called Alchemy. And it's basically about like the role, it's not even the role of branding and advertising and marketing. It's more like a book about human behavior and psychology. And it's just, it's just like an interesting study of how people interpret the world and what influences them and how, it traces back to like survival instincts and like things coded in your genes. But it does kind of then snap forward to like how we talk about the world, products, how we market things. Really interesting, kind of more like nitty gritty, less like purely inspirational, but just like a very pertinent, designy kind of book.
Okay. Yeah. I'll add that to the list then. So that was Alchemy, was it?
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. Super. Well, we have unfortunately ran out of time, and I'm back to back today. But it's been really good speaking to you, Michael. And for anyone that's interested in finding out more about a facility, I will put some links when I promote it on LinkedIn, but also on the show notes. So do reach out, have a conversation, and see whether there could be some beautiful work to be done. But until then, Michael, thank you so much for joining me, and we'll speak again soon.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Design Journeys podcast. I hope you found it insightful and inspiring. If you did, please consider sharing it with a friend or colleague who might enjoy it too. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Before I sign off, just a quick note from me. Besides hosting this podcast, I'm also the founder of Kodu, a recruitment business that specializes in physical product development. We help startups, established brands, and consultancies find top-tier mechanical design and development talent, often in as little as 6 weeks. At Kodu, we're all about providing an outstanding experience. with our clients and candidates consistently rating us plus 88 on the Net Promoter Score, or NPS, which is world class in recruitment. Oh, and I should probably mention we have a 100% fill rate too. The inspiring people I've met over the years in consumer electronics, e-bikes, medical devices and beyond have been the reason behind creating this podcast. If you'd like to know more about Kodu and how we can help your business, feel free to visit teamkodu.com or connect with me, Chris Whyte, on LinkedIn. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.